I want to thank everybody for coming to our Joint Economic Committee hearing on energy efficiency. I want to welcome my colleagues and the chairman of our Energy Committee, Senator Bingaman, who has shown great interest in this issue, as in all of the energy issues. Now, of course, everywhere we go, Legion halls, parades, weddings, the high price of gasoline is one of the very first things people bring up. In a few short months, families from New York to Washington State will also be struggling to pay their winter heating bills. So it's no wonder that Congress has held 60 hearings on energy policy so far this year, 20 alone in July. Americans across the country are being squeezed. Middle-class families are paying $2,000 more in gasoline costs alone, double what they spent in 2001. We had a committee hearing last month to examine whether these high prices were a temporary bubble or a painful new reality for our economy. At that late June hearing, oil topped $134 a barrel. It's now $122 a barrel. If there's no oil bubble, or if prices temporarily decline as they have, and we put off doing the necessary things we have to do, like investing in efficiency programs and alternative fuels, we'll be even further behind than we are now from breaking our foreign oil dependence. So, it's clear that demand for energy, especially in rapidly developing large countries like China and India, is on the rise. So the reality is we need to look beyond quick fixes that will do little for consumers and less to address this energy crisis. In the long term, we must address the demand side of the energy equation. And while I've supported some targeted drilling in the Gulf of Mexico, I don't believe we can drill our way out of this crisis, and neither do the American people. According to a recent poll, 76% of Americans said we should focus on investing in new energy technologies, renewable fuels, and more efficient vehicles, rather than expanding oil exploration and drilling. One of the good things that came out of the oil shock of the 70s was the dramatic push for energy conservation. Why don't we do more of that now? California made tremendous efforts under Governor Jerry Brown during that time to reduce consumption, and now they are now well below the national average in energy usage per capita. Again, let me repeat that. California, home of the car, is below average in terms of energy consumption, and that's simply because they did smart conservation measures 30 years ago. One environmentalist said, alternative fuels are the sizzle, but conservation and efficiency is the steak. We're here to have a nice steak dinner at this hearing. But to some, conservation has the connotation of discomfort, using an extra blanket in the winter, easing up on the air conditioning in the summer. But as our witnesses will discuss, energy efficiency is actually doing more with less. We'll learn about the most recent state to implement landmark energy efficiency and alternative energy programs from the Massachusetts Secretary of Energy, Ian Bowles. But what should we be doing in Washington to address this problem? We should be requiring utilities to achieve 10% energy savings each year by helping their customers with energy efficiency programs, improving energy efficiency in their own distribution systems or through credit trading. We need to require states to update their commercial and residential building codes to achieve a 30% energy savings by 2015 and 50% by 2022, based on the 2006 building code standard. That's an idea that offers big bang for the buck, because buildings consume a great deal of our energy and are very inefficient. By most statistics, heating and cooling buildings consumes more energy than the gasoline at which we drive our cars. So we're ignoring this whole area, and it's important. I want to thank Senator Bingaman in our Democratic energy proposal. Some of the things that I've been talking about with building efficiency, he added in to his comprehensive plan. Finally, we should be giving states like Massachusetts the ability to set higher appliance standards with the proper approval from the Department of Energy to help the federal government and big manufacturers stay ahead of the technology curve. Another idea that Dan Riker addresses prominently in his testimony and is long overdue, a reinvigorated and beefed up weatherization program to help millions of Americans consume less energy, stay warmer in the winter, cooler in the summer. Given the recent inability of the Senate to increase funding for low-income home energy assistance low energy assistance program we all call LIHEAP, and what is predicted to be a terrible winter heating season, I'm worried that families in New York and around the country will be choosing between heat and food or between heat and health care. This common sense investment in reducing energy consumption is an energy hat trick. It helps families who are making ends meet, improves our energy security, and strengthens our economy. The bottom line is that if you don't encourage energy efficiency, if you don't invest in alternative energy, and if you don't tell the big oil companies they can no longer run energy policy in America, we will not succeed, plain and simple. Our witnesses today are experts in doing more with less, which is why they will get only 5 minutes to make their opening statements, but also because we have, and even I took 5 minutes and 22 seconds, and I'm not known for brevity. Congresswoman Maloney.
Thank you, Chairman Schumer, for holding this hearing to examine the role that efficiency measures can play in our energy strategy. 3 years ago, the Republican-controlled Congress passed energy legislation they said would bring down the cost of gasoline and end our dependence on foreign oil. Instead, the price of gasoline has nearly doubled since then, whether it's paying over $4 for a gallon for gas or milk due to soaring fuel costs. Americans are paying a hefty price for the failure of this Congress to pursue a sensible energy strategy over the past 7 years of this administration. We cannot drill our way out of the problem. Meeting the energy needs of our nation will require a comprehensive strategy for achieving greater efficiency and investing more in renewable fuels. The Democratic-led Congress has already enacted into law the first new fuel efficiency standards in over 3 decades and made an historic commitment to biofuels grown here at home, both of which are reducing consumption and saving families money. We are building on these steps by encouraging the use of mass transit and expanding tax incentives for renewable energy to spur American innovation and business investment and create green jobs. Record energy prices are forcing us all to rethink the way we live and commute, and companies are also rethinking the way they do business. In short, we all need to think outside the oil barrel. Today, we will hear about the many ways in which families, businesses, and government can work together to achieve greater energy efficiencies, which Mr. Reichert has noted is perhaps the fastest, cleanest, and cheapest way of addressing our energy challenges. More flexible workplace policies can also play an important role. A recent survey by the Society for Human Resources Management found that 26% of businesses are offering flexible schedules to help employees cope with high gas prices. Across the nation, local governments are altering work schedules to save energy and cut costs. Utah's Republican Governor, John Huntsman, recently announced that most state employees will be moving to a mandatory 4-day work week to reduce the state's energy consumption, while also providing workers with greater flexibility. A bill I have co-authored with Senator Kennedy, the Working Families Flexibility Act, would help working families across the country by putting a process in place for employees to request a change in their work schedules and providing job protection when making that request. More and more businesses are finding that flexible work schedules and other family-friendly programs are good for the bottom line in terms of reducing turnover and increasing productivity. What's also coming to light are the ways in which these policies can help companies and families reduce consumption, cut energy costs, and ease traffic congestion. Our nation's continued prosperity depends on meeting the challenges of our energy needs and bringing relief to American families. Chairman Schumer, again, I thank you for holding this hearing, and I look forward to our panelists' testimony. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chairman. Thank you, Vice Chair Maloney. Senator Brownsback.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for holding the hearing. Thank you, witnesses, for being here. I look forward to the testimony. Mr. Chairman, there is much we can do to improve efficiency, and doing so is certainly one part of the equation, using less. But we must address the supply side of the equation as well. And since this is the Joint Economic Committee, I think it's interesting and appropriate to look at some of the economics of this as well. As a nation, we produce barely half the amount of crude oil and about the same amount of natural gas as we did in 1970. Roughly, we consume 25% of the world's oil and produce about 3% of it. According to BEA, in the first quarter of 2008, our imports of petroleum products amounted to $451 billion on an annualized basis. Tomorrow, when BEA releases its first look at second quarter GDP, I suspect we'll see an even higher number. I mention this in terms of GDP because imports are a subtraction from GDP, and lower GDP means fewer jobs, lower government revenues, and a larger deficit. In the first 5 months of this calendar year, had we imported 1 million barrels of oil less, just 1 million barrels of oil less per day, our trade deficit would have been $14 billion lower over those 5 months, and our government deficit would have been lower substantially as well. The policy that the other side of the aisle is defending with such zeal by failing to promote the discovery and drilling and production of additional domestic oil supplies is sending money and jobs outside the United States by the truckload. This is wrong, must be stopped. That is what I and my colleagues on this side of the aisle have been fighting so hard for over on the Senate floor. It's time we took action and gave the American people some needed and real relief, and it's time we started acting like a Senate and start voting on these issues. Let's have some votes on these, and let's move forward with also addressing the supply side and the economic side of this equation. Let me close by noting that drilling is not the entire answer to the entire question. We need a broad-based approach that continues to encourage the development and use of alternative sources of energy, like biofuels, wind, solar, and so on, using less, but we also have to produce more. We should require that an increasing share of the vehicles sold in the United States be flex fuel or alternative fuel vehicles that can run on ethanol, methanol, or gasoline in any combination. And the tripartisan group of senators has put forward a bill, and that's an amendment filed on this energy bill as well. But we must also maximize in an environmentally sensitive manner our existing resources so we're not sending all of those petroleum dollars overseas. To do less would be irresponsible. I hope my colleagues on the other side of the aisle will quickly recognize that both sides of the equation, supply and demand, must be addressed. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Brownback. We're now going to go to our witnesses. Because we have votes coming up, we're going to try to move the hearing along. It's such an important hearing, and I hope people, my colleagues, will hear about this because it is one of the sort of, as we called the hearing, was called the hidden secret to solving our energy crisis. That's only a little hyperbolic. It is still hidden, and it won't solve the energy crisis, but it'll do a lot more than a lot of other things. So now let me introduce our witnesses and ask them each to can each put their entire statements in the record to try and each keep within that 5-minute limit. Ian Bowles, he's Secretary of the Executive Office of Environmental Affairs in Massachusetts. He oversees the Commonwealth's 6 environmental, natural resource, and energy regulatory agencies. And has nearly 20 years of both public and private sector experience in the energy and environmental sectors. He served in the Clinton administration as Associate Director of the White House Council on Environmental Quality. Dan Riker is Director of Climate Change and Energy Initiatives for Google.org, the arm of Google devoted to making investments and advancing policy in the areas of climate change and energy, global development, and global health. He, too, has 20 years of experience in business, government, and non-government organizations. When I heard Mr. Riker lecture on energy efficiency, it sort of blew me away, and I've been dedicated to that issue ever since hearing him speak several years ago. Jonathan Koomey is professor at Stanford University. He's a project scientist at the Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory, a consulting professor at Stanford University. For more than 11 years, he led the National Laboratory's end-use forecasting group, which analyzes markets for efficient products and technologies for improving the energy and environmental aspect of these products, and is author or co-author of 8 books and 150 articles. And Mark P. Mills of ICX Technology is the co-founder and chairman of that company. He's also a founding partner of Digital Power Capital, served as a technology advisor for Bank of America Securities, and as a co-author of the Huber-Mills Digital Power Report. Under President Reagan, he served as staff consultant to the White House Science Office. Secretary Bowles, your entire statement will be read in the record. You may begin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and other members of the committee. I'm delighted to be here. My main message to you all is that we have, broadly speaking, built an inefficient delivery system for energy in the United States, and we have rewarded utilities predominantly for selling power and not necessarily for meeting the load of their consumer in the least cost type of way. We've done a number of things in Massachusetts to address that, and I'll give a summary of those and then be happy to take your questions. Massachusetts has long been a leader in this area. We, like our neighbors in New York and in Connecticut, don't have much in the way of indigenous fossil supply. So for us, we have high transportation costs and inherently higher energy costs in our region. That's made some of our efficiency investments relatively cheaper as compared to the price of power. In some of our other states, we are just behind New York and Connecticut as the third most energy efficient state in terms of the economic productivity we get out from each energy unit that is consumed. We today face the challenge of greenhouse gas emissions, record high fuel prices, and other factors that make now the right time for us to be investing more in energy efficiency. Governor Patrick, I think, has also seen the economic opportunity in clean energy technology and made it a major part of his economic strategy to good effect in Massachusetts. Historically, we've had utility-operated energy efficiency programs that help consumers with retrofitting their appliances, help replacing other equipment that is oftentimes a heavy energy user. But historically, this has been capped. We have said you have a certain amount of money each year that you can spend on efficiency that the ratepayers will be provided. We've never had a true market where the energy efficiency could compete with power generation to figure out who can meet the needs of our consumers in the cheapest way. So it's a very simple, very American concept of having a true energy market where we're trying to figure out what's the least cost way for our consumers to be able to meet their energy needs. So some sweeping energy legislation that the governor signed recently really uncaps efficiency and puts in place a system in wonky terms called least cost procurement, where essentially we require the utilities to go out and buy any energy efficiency that's cheaper than the marginal cost of buying power. It's a relatively simple idea that says focus on the least cost solutions. Our Public Utility Commission has also just issued a broad rate decoupling order, which essentially breaks the disincentive the utilities have had. If they get rewarded and their revenues are tied to how much power they sell, their incentive is obviously not to have people use less of it because they get less revenue. Essentially, rate decoupling turns that on its head, says you the utilities, and our deregulated power market, they don't own any power generation. They shouldn't have any financial interest in how much they're selling through their wires. They're just in the wires business. So essentially rate decoupling severs that link and puts them into the efficiency business. I think it's a very sensible policy driven by cost imperatives. We've done a variety of other things in Massachusetts that are relevant to these matters. A new building code. Several of the other New England states have done this, and others. We require now greenhouse gas analysis in the context of state environmental review. Our version of NEPA we have in the state, and we require our major developers to go through and analyze their greenhouse gas emissions and look at opportunities to avoid, minimize, and mitigate those emissions in their projects. We have a far-reaching executive order requiring that any new state buildings be LEED certified plus 20% better in terms of energy efficiency, and have been working away in that regard. In terms of federal policy that's relevant, I'd echo the chairman's remarks about appliance standards. We in New England are, I think, shortly going to apply for a waiver on furnace efficiency, something provided for in your statute. This is an area, to my mind, of real federal leadership. Setting a broad carbon policy for the nation, to my mind, would be very helpful. Me in Massachusetts and many other states have been building systems like the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, but I think we all understand we need a common currency for pricing carbon across our economy. So we encourage you in that area. Model building codes, really focusing on end-use energy efficiency in buildings. And then there's an obvious federal role in the technology piece as well here, and major economic opportunity for the nation. Acknowledging the comments made by Senator Brownback, I'm happy to talk some about how supply matters in Massachusetts as well. My main point for you all is that there are cheap efficiencies that we should be getting simply by aligning the incentives on our utilities in a smart way that focuses on cost. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Secretary Bowles. Mr. Riker.
Mr. Chairman, Ms. Vice Chair, ranking members, and members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify.
If you could turn on your mic, please, sir.
Thank you for the opportunity to testify. To meet the critical challenges of the 21st century, climate change, energy security, and economic development, we need a bold new vision for how America generates and uses electricity. The core of that vision must be an electricity system that is clean, efficient, reliable, and secure. One that enables hundreds of thousands of megawatts of green power, millions of plug-in vehicles, and tens of millions of energy-smart homes and businesses. Dramatically increased energy efficiency is fundamental. By many measures, it is our fastest, cheapest, and cleanest opportunity to address our energy challenges, the real low-hanging fruit in our economy. From cars and homes to factories and offices, we know how to cost-effectively deliver vast quantities of energy savings today. In the 70s and 80s, we were asked to do less with less, to lower the thermostat, turn off the lights, don a sweater, and leave the car in the garage. Energy efficiency takes a different approach, offering the opportunity to do more with less, to use energy more productively. As one energy expert colorfully puts it, all people want is cold beer and hot showers. We are interested in the results of energy use, not the energy itself. How much energy we use to cool the beer and heat the water is a choice we make. According to a 2007 study by McKinsey, efficiency opportunities could keep global energy demand growth at less than 1% per year, or less than half of what is projected to 2020. This would cut global demand by the equivalent of 64 million barrels of oil per day, or almost 150% of today's entire U.S. energy consumption. A new McKinsey study makes clear the attractive benefits of investments in efficiency. Additional global investment of $170 billion annually for the next 13 years would be sufficient to cut projected global demand by at least half. These investments would have an annual average rate of return of 17% and would generate annual energy savings ramping up to $900 billion per year by 2020. And they would deliver up to half of the reduction in global greenhouse gases required to cap long-term atmospheric concentrations. Capturing this vast potential, however, will require a significant policy push. Aggressive federal policy can increase investment in energy efficiency. In my written testimony, I outline a number of promising approaches. Let me briefly highlight four. First is automobile fuel efficiency. Congress's recent boost in CAFE is a good step, but we can do better. Existing technologies, hybrid electric drives, drivetrain improvements, lightweight materials, can today get us to roughly double the mileage of our current passenger fleet. An exciting technological development is the recent emergence of plug-in hybrids which connect to the electric grid for recharging. Charged at night, they can use lower cost and cleaner off-peak electricity. Plugged in during the day, they can send power back to the grid to meet peak demand. Google.org has converted several regular hybrids to plug-ins. In a recent test, our plug-ins achieved as much as 93 miles per gallon on average for all trips and 115 miles per gallon for city trips. In June, we co-hosted a conference with Brookings to explore how government can help accelerate their commercialization. At a minimum, we need to increase funding for federal R&D, invest in the electricity infrastructure to support hybrid plug-ins, modernize our regulatory system to permit real-time pricing of power, and provide incentives such as federal tax credits. The second important federal policy is an energy efficiency resource standard. The EERS sets efficiency resource targets for electricity and gas suppliers over a given period of time, building on policies in 9 states. Texas utilities, for example, now meet a specified percentage of their load growth needs through efficiency programs. The EERS is a compelling complement to a national renewable portfolio standard. Last year, the House adopted a combined RPS-EERS that allowed up to 4% of a 15% national renewable mandate to be met through energy efficiency. Congress should give strong consideration to this combined approach. Mr. Chairman, the third policy I want to highlight is low-income home weatherization. Across the nation, low-income families this winter will increasingly face the choice between heating and eating. Congress continues to debate the traditional fix, LIHEAP, an absolutely critical but in no way sufficient answer to this problem. What we need is home weatherization. By upgrading a home's furnace, sealing leaky ducts, fixing windows, and adding insulation, we can cut energy bills by 20 to 40% in winter and summer and save even more with efficient appliances and lighting. Unfortunately, our national policies fail to recognize the benefits of low-income weatherization. While the nation has weatherized about 6 million low-income homes since '76, more than 28 million remain eligible. Congress should make a national commitment to weatherize at least 1 million low-income homes each year for the next decade. The price tag for retrofitting 10 million low-income homes is relatively modest, about $2 billion annually, with the added benefit of major greenhouse gas reductions and jobs. Finally, government-backed financial mechanisms could significantly increase the deployment of clean energy technologies, including energy efficiency. Senator Bingaman's recent bill would encourage banks to make loans for clean energy projects by providing a secondary market for their loans. Senator Domenici's bill creates a clean energy investment bank with authority to invest in eligible clean energy projects using a variety of financial tools. In a recent hearing, I urged both senators to integrate the best of their bills to take clean energy to scale. In conclusion, the federal government has a significant role to play in increasing investment in energy efficiency. By adopting a forward-thinking set of policies, Congress can stimulate significant near-term investment in energy efficiency with major economic, environmental, and security benefits. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Riker. Dr. Kumi.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and to the other members of the committee for the opportunity to share my views with you today. Now, to keep the lawyers happy, I have to say that this testimony represents my professional opinion, not that of the Department of Energy or the Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory. So, as Dan mentioned, one of the most important lessons of the past few decades in energy policy is that improving energy efficiency is the fastest, cheapest, cleanest way to address the problems of energy security and climate risks. Energy supply technologies will also no doubt play an important role in dealing with these problems, but the history is clear. Energy efficiency is the most abundant and least expensive of all the options we have. So how can we best capture that resource? Now, some have called for an Apollo project for energy technologies, but I think a better analogy would be the broader U.S. response after the Soviet Union launched Sputnik. That means broad societal mobilization, massive investments in science and engineering education, substantial increases in basic and applied research and development, and implementation efforts on the scale of the Apollo project. Now, for energy efficiency, that means more energy efficiency standards, that means Energy Star labeling, utility programs, revenue-neutral fee bates, tax credits, prizes like the Automotive X Prize, business plan competitions like the California Clean Tech Open, institutional commitments to efficiency goals, as Dan mentioned, institutional procurement of efficient products, more funding for education and training, and big increases in energy R&D funding, which has fallen to historical lows since the 1970s. But we need more than just technological innovation. People and institutions also need to evolve to meet the new challenges, and with the overarching goal of breaking down barriers to efficiency and making the more efficient choice always the more profitable choice. So I'm going to give you an example from some recent work I've been doing in data centers. These are the high-density computing facilities that power the internet and that help virtually all modern companies to operate efficiently. What you find in these facilities is that typically the people who buy the computers have one budget, and the people who buy the electricity and supply the cooling to the computers have a separate budget. And so the people who buy the computers don't have an incentive to spend even an additional dollar for a more efficient server because the savings accrue, and the savings are substantial, typically $5 or $10 for every dollar spent on a server for efficiency. The savings are substantial, and yet they accrue in someone else's budget. So the IT folks just won't buy a more efficient server. So that's an example. I have others that we can talk about in the question period. That's an example of the kind of institutional issues that are surmountable, but we need to figure out how to do these, to solve these problems more substantially, more broadly. And keep in mind that these are the most mission critical, the most sophisticated, the most carefully designed facilities in business today. And even in these facilities, we see these kind of misplaced incentives. And that to me means that it's likely these misplaced incentives are pervasive throughout the economy. Great challenge also means great opportunity. The U.S. has the chance to set a new course, one that combines economic benefits with improvements in environmental quality. Now's the time, with oil prices near record highs and the climate crisis bearing relentlessly down upon us, to make that new future a reality. My testimony, submitted for the record, describes some specific ideas for how to take up that challenge. Thank you again for the opportunity to present today.
Thank you, Dr. Kumi. Mr. Mills.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, for the opportunity to present some thoughts, high-level thoughts in my case, on the role of energy efficiency in the U.S. economy. I think history will record that we are today on the cusp of an energy revolution, one involving efficiency, and with implications as deep and far-reaching as the industrial and the electric revolutions of the previous 2 centuries. Each of these previous pivots in history was similarly anchored in profound changes in the efficiency with which we could use basic resources, and energy resources in particular. The emerging efficiency revolution derives directly from our nation's collective investment of trillions of dollars in the intellectual capital and infrastructure of the silicon and digital economy. It's not a single device or program or a solution, but the emergence of an entirely new structural approach to energy efficiency, what I would call a hybrid energy economy. The nature and implications of this paradigm shift are epitomized by the hybrid electric car, which some of the other witnesses have talked about. Conventional cars waste gasoline, stop and go, coasting, running, unnecessarily it stops, and generally operating an engine suboptimally. You could do manually much of what a hybrid car does automatically, though it would be rather annoying. You turn the engine off every time you don't need it, at every stop, when you're braking, when you're coasting. You restart it to accelerate or cruise. This kind of behavior would increase urban fuel economy 10 to 50%. Or you could hybridize a car, which is to wrap the engine and the drive shaft with sensors, power electronics, electric motors, batteries, microprocessors, software, and high-speed communications. In short, all the stuff of the digital economy. Then you let all that digital stuff seamlessly and invisibly juggle the on-off and optimally operate the constellation of energy-consuming components in real time, reacting to dynamic conditions in ways you could never accomplish manually. Nearly everything in our economy operates like today's cars, suboptimally. And building and running things in the physical world is difficult to do optimally. And cars, in fact, are the simplest things to fix in this regard, much simpler than factories, offices, and homes. And yet the latter collectively consume 70% of all of our energy suboptimally. The technologies that enable a hybrid economy arrive first to serve the information markets, the data, voice, video. And they came first, to put it simplistically, because data doesn't weigh anything. So pure information devices just need milliwatts or watts. And to move tons of stuff and people and materials, you need kilowatts and terawatts. It's a much more difficult task, took longer to do. The emerging hybrid economy takes America to the next quantum leap beyond automation or supply chain management or such things as telecommuting and e-commerce. All of those energy saving systems are of course important, but they're just building blocks to the deeper hybrid economy phenomena that I'm describing. Over the past 50 years, the 20th century's technology has doubled the overall efficiency of the U.S. economy. This has allowed the GDP to increase 6-fold with a comparatively modest 2.5-fold increase in our energy consumption. The hybrid economy can do this and much more in the future. But the one thing to keep in mind is that radical improvements in energy efficiency produce unexpected and, by and large, beneficial outcomes. I mean, energy efficiency, to use specific examples for one of our witnesses today, of course, is what made Google possible and what made Apple possible. Operating at the energy efficiency of the first computers, a single Google data center would consume the entire electricity supply of New York City. At the efficiency of early radios, iPhones would be the size of trunks and served by cell towers the size of the Washington Monument. Instead, today we have staggering improvements in the computing and information energy efficiency, and there are consequently thousands of data centers and billions of computers and cell phones. Both have now become ubiquitous industries of their own with vast, sprawling, and productive infrastructures. There's every reason to believe that more of the same of this is in store with the next wave of efficient technologies emerging in what I've been calling the hybrid energy economy. But much of it is unpredictable in both direction and form. It's because efficiency, like its economic cousin, labor productivity, arises primarily from technology progress, then the challenge, this is an old challenge for the Congress and for states, the challenge is to find ways to incentivize and accelerate innovative technology. How do we encourage markets to adopt near-term innovation and invest in enabling long-term infrastructure? I would suggest in both cases money is the most powerful tool. In the short term, high-cost energy does accelerate near-term capital investment in more efficient technologies. In the long term, however, this is where federal funding has a central role in basic R&D that's essential to fuel the next cycle of innovation and, frankly, to educate the emerging class of energy innovators. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, for the opportunity to present these.
Thank you, Mr. Mills. I want to thank all four of our witnesses for excellent testimony. I'm going to yield my time to Chairman Bingaman to ask questions, and then I'll have to step out for a minute. Vice Chair Maloney will have continue the hearing. I'll be back to ask questions at the end rather than at the beginning. Thank you. Chairman Bingaman.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, for having this hearing, and thanks to all the excellent witnesses. One of the obvious points, I guess, for people who've looked at this efficiency issue is that we need to get the right information to the people who are making decisions at every stage or in every part of our economy in order to get maximum efficiency in the system. We have a proposal in an amendment that I've offered related to energy on the speculation bill that's currently pending in the Senate to establish a requirement that all vehicles beginning in 2012 have a fuel economy monitoring device put on them, similar to what you see when you drive a Prius. A very similar thing is this whole smart metering idea with regard to electricity, so that people know how much electricity they're using at any particular time. And I guess, Dr. Kumi, let me start with you. You know, you're another example of one of the issues you were pointing to there about the incentives being in the wrong place, the people deciding which computer to buy didn't have any incentive to buy an energy efficient computer. Another example, which is pretty clear, is the Coca-Cola and the various companies that put in these vending machines in federal buildings or any building have very little interest in how much energy they use, because there's no savings to them, obviously. They just plug it into the wall and the landlord pays the bill. Do you have any additional insights you could give us as to how we get this information to people in a way that allows them to make the right decision? Dr. Kumi.
Thank you, Senator. You've got one of my examples, the vending machine. Another example is a cable box. So the cable company buys the cable box, and you, in your house, pay the electric bill to warm your cat and do other important tasks. So the question you asked relates to information. And my initial response is information is important when the people who are able to make the decision can take that information and use the skills that they have to come to the right decision. But in many cases, these choices are small choices. So the choice of how much, electricity your cable box uses, that's a difficult thing for an ordinary person to investigate. And so we have to think a little bit about the transaction costs associated with getting people to do the calculation. Maybe it doesn't make sense to have the customer do the calculation. Maybe it makes sense to have an Energy Star label where EPA and Department of Energy did the calculation once already, and then all the customer needs to do is find the Energy Star label, or to have an energy efficiency standard again that just so I think information is very important, but in some cases I want to emphasize that sometimes the transaction costs aren't worth it for individuals to do these kind of calculations. There are other tools we can bring to bear to solve the problem.
You also had a comment in your written testimony here about how we ought to see about FERC telling us how we go about promoting standardized electronic formats for utility rates. Could you elaborate on that a little bit?
So one of the problems that big companies face is that they have facilities in many different states. And the utility rates for companies particularly are very complicated. So there's demand charges and electric charges, and they vary by time of day and all this. And most of these rates are only published on paper nowadays. And so it's very hard for a company to do the comparisons they need to do to choose to use energy efficiently. And the proposal that I made in the testimony was to standardize those formats for the electronic rates and have that standardization help companies like Google design web tools to help these big companies as well as small consumers to compare rates and make the most efficient choice for them. So this is, again, use of information technology, as Mr. Mills pointed out, use of information technology to do our energy sums more carefully and come to the more efficient conclusion at the end of the day.
Secretary Bowles, did you try to address any of these issues in this recent legislation you adopted in Massachusetts?
Senator, we did to a degree. Just for your backdrop, we have in Massachusetts very high penetration of real-time meter and real-time pricing of power in the industrial and commercial areas, where peak power is, 10 times or more, sometimes much more than that, more expensive than baseload power. And so companies can get tremendous economics by moving their load around and avoiding the peak hours, and they do that, and they've responded well. And what we haven't seen in our deregulated power market in New England is really penetration into the retail level, whereas we have consumers who figured out cell phones, we need to buy 500 minutes to 1,000. We don't have those products available in the retail market, in part because the competitive energy suppliers just haven't seen enough profit potential in that area to really get into the market. So one of the barriers is cheap real-time meters, and I think that's an area where the federal government could intervene, to my mind, helpfully. In direct answer to your question, yes, the legislature created a pilot program that will get at some of this. Our utilities, many of them have somewhat smart meters for the purposes of service efficiency, but they aren't in the dynamic pricing business yet. So the energy legislation takes a step in that regard, but it hasn't been one of the lowest hanging fruit for us as yet in terms of cost.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Bigman, thank you. Senator Brownback?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate that. What is the automotive X Prize, Dr. Kumi, that you were talking about?
So the original X Prize was for space travel.
Right.
It was a prize of, I think, $100 million for the first.
It's $10 million to get up to space twice within 2 weeks.
Okay, so the automotive X Prize is a similar sort of idea. So it's a large amount of money that is given for automobiles that reach a certain efficiency target. So they'll have to run a standard.
It's not been set yet. It's something that you're advocating.
No, it's something that the same group that did the X Prize for space is also doing this for automotive.
Do you know the specifics on this?
I don't know details on this, but the general idea is that having these kind of prizes stimulates innovation because it gets many different teams of engineers to focus on solving the problem.
I agree. That's the first I'd heard about it, so I was curious about the specifics on it. I wanted to see if we could do more with that, because I find a lot of people, as I'm out traveling around or doing town hall meetings, everybody's talking about what they're doing. I was talking about a biodiesel the other day on the phone at the airport, and a guy behind me is listening and said, hey, I've got a conversion system to take old vegetable oil. I'm doing this. And I was on a town hall meeting last night, and this guy called in and he said, if you guys would just license us to drive golf carts around our little town here, I'm already plugging it in. If we can get up to, it goes everywhere I need to go. And I thought, wow, that's kind of an interesting idea in a small town setting. I hope somebody's thinking about doing that. It's interesting, the innovation that you're seeing, and that the high prices do stimulate to take place. And this would be, I think, a good one. I'm hopeful in the future we're going to have a plug-in hybrid flex fuel vehicle will be the standard model. So you plug it into the 20, 30 miles on electricity, it switches over to hybrid, it can do a flex fuel, it can run on ethanol, methanol, gasoline, or any combination thereof, and that's existing technology that we could do and really stretch a gallon of gasoline a long ways. Mr. Mills, I guess that's really along your line of a hybrid energy economy, which I find very exciting, and from a state like mine, a lot of wind sources, a lot of agricultural sources, we look at this as, okay, now this is a chance that we can really produce in this economy. Let me ask you, though, but you seem to premise your basis on the key here is to create an investment strategy to do this. Am I catching that right or not?
No, the key is to understand how we can accelerate capital turnover to new technologies. In a sense, it's an investment strategy. Businesses will buy more efficient equipment when it's in their interest, because most of my experience are aware of what it costs them to do things, particularly these days, whether they're buying electricity or oil. But equipment has sunk costs. It still works well. No capital in it if it's fully depreciated. So for having a decision internally to move to the next generation of technology, whether you're a manufacturing plant, a commercial building, is generally literally an investment decision for the operator.
We stimulate that here from tax policy, tax credits, subsidization, accelerated depreciation, research R&D would be the primary route forward.
The latter would help long-term technology. I think one area probably the whole panel agrees is it's important to stimulate long-term R&D, which is dominantly a federal role, typically in the long-term science and engineering. But that doesn't do much for us today. Obviously, to get businesses to change their behavior like consumers, you have to decide to buy a new car. And the car you have may be fully paid for, and you've got zero additional capital cost in that, even though it's inefficient.
That's where I think we ought to go. I read a paper on this one time that talked about the three waves of really environmental concern, the first wave being conservation, second wave being regulation, and the third wave being an investment strategy. And it sure strikes me that that's the way that we could all agree upon to move on forward with, is that you incentivize the investment in this. It makes sense for the economy, it makes sense for the ecology, and it's primarily focused on the energy end of the equation, which I think would be critical. One final question, if I could get it in here, is there's a lot of talk about diffusing energy sourcing. So you have energy instead of from big power plants, but in addition to big power plants, you go to diffusing the energy. What do you think of that, A? B, if you can do it quickly, how would you incentivize that?
And usually for price mechanisms, you're talking about distributed energy where there's lots of small power plants. We make lots of small power plants already. That's our cars. We make millions and millions of them a year. They're power plants. They can make electricity. The distributed energy market is bigger globally in the developing economies, largely because they don't have the economies of scale that we have. On average, it's cheaper to make energy centrally, but in a high-cost environment, there's a lot of folks who look at distributed generation. Rooftop solar can make more sense than utility solar because you're paying for high costs at the point of use as opposed to competing with very cheap power at the point of generation. So there's certainly room for it. In fact, I think we will have not much choices, as a matter of fact.
Could I just comment on your...
If the chairman's okay with that.
I just want to comment quickly on your question, Senator Brownback, about distributed power. It goes back to the rate structure point I was making again, that in our system prior to rate decoupling, the utilities have had every reason not to want to have that distributed power because their revenue is tied to the power that flows through their wire to your home. So if you do a big solar array, then they just lose money. And so that's part of the point of, to my mind, simple things we can do to have the utilities be in the wires business and indifferent to whether or not you do solar in your home or someone does a combined heat and power unit in a commercial development. I think that's an important part of the puzzle.
Thank you, Chairman.
Senator Klobuchar.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to our witnesses. I'm sorry I was late. We're trying to get those energy tax extenders done, as well as some other things in the transportation area. And I think you all know I come from the state of Minnesota, where we believe in science and the potential for new technology. We've brought the world everything from the Post-it note to the pacemaker. And we're also very advanced in what we're doing with energy. We have one of the most aggressive energy portfolio, renewable energy portfolio standards in the country, with the 25% goal with renewable electricity by 2025. And we also have some interesting things with Best Buy and Super Value and some of our other major companies that are working in the energy area. And my question first is this idea of the energy efficiency in the homes. And I have noticed, especially Mr. Riker, if you could answer this first, that there's just much more interest in our state in this now. It's no longer Jimmy Carter going on the TV in a sweater talking about in a glum face what's going to happen. We have a number of loan programs in our state. We have one that for up to $10,000 you can get a loan to update your homes, but there's really a low usage rate of this program because people have to initiate it on their own. And could you talk a little bit about incentives, and anyone else can join in, for homeowners to make improvements and how we could better get them involved in this? Because I see this as part of the key. It's no longer just an environmental issue. To them, it's an economic issue. And if they could get those meters and on their washers and dryers and figure out how to do it so they could get the information, I think we'd be a lot better off.
It's a great opportunity. Home energy use, building energy use is a very significant percentage of our overall energy use, and we have great opportunities to reduce it dramatically. And obviously we have financial incentives right now with higher energy prices, but that doesn't get us all that we need. And I think there's a variety of things. The first, we've got to give people better information. And this once-a-month paper energy bill we get from our utility just doesn't do it. Most people don't understand it. They don't know how to...
Like me?
Yes.
Okay.
And so that's the place to start, is just giving people better information. And that starts with a home energy audit, which is available increasingly from utilities and from other providers. You can go in and get a very good baseline assessment of what's going on in your house. We even have advanced technologies now to do that. You can use something called a blower door test, which pressurizes a house and with an infrared monitor find everything down to the size of a pinhole in terms of leaks. And with that, you really understand where to go. So that's the first thing, is just setting a baseline so people understand. Giving them access to real-time information about their energy use. As we say, let's give them a speedometer, not an odometer. Let's give them actual real-time usage, as you have increasingly in automobiles. If we had that for our homes, if you knew at any given moment that your child was up there in the second floor bedroom and somehow lots of things were on that didn't need to be on, and you can make some adjustments. Even better.
So how much would it cost to buy these things? Or would regular people be able to buy them? How would we sell them at places like Best Buy, or would the government give some kind of deal to get them so that we could get people going on this? That's what I'm trying to figure out.
Yeah, there's lots of approaches, but one of the most significant, and I think one that has potentially the greatest impact, are what we call smart meters. You replace your simple, dumb electric and gas meters with something that has two-way information, can talk to the utility, can send information to the consumer on a real-time basis that you get in your laptop. We have many utilities now in the United States which have committed to putting in smart meters. Southern California Edison is going to be installing over 5 million. And that's the sort of thing that really gets people going. In terms of federal incentives, tax credits, both to industry and utilities and to homeowners for installing this kind of equipment could help a great deal. Real-time pricing, so that there is some incentive, for example, to wash your clothes and dry them at night instead of during the day. A choice, not a mandate, but a choice, because you knew if you did it, it would be 50% less. Air conditioners that can actually talk to the utility on their own. So at any given point, you've made a deal with the utility that you're willing to have your air conditioner cycled off for 5 or 10 minutes at a time when the temperature hits X degrees, and you get an extra $25 off your electricity bill as a result of that. So there's all sorts of things that can be done that start with technology that move from there to federal and state support. And the good news is this isn't rocket science any longer. We have these technologies available.
Secretary Bowles?
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with your comment very much. We in Massachusetts now, the governor has been talking about energy audits. We now have such a backlog of them that they aren't even scheduling them now until November. That's a phenomenon where we've only given a certain amount of energy efficiency to the funding to the utilities to spend until it's gone. What we've done in restructuring the energy market in Massachusetts is basically said to the utilities, you can spend any money on these efficiency investments, including energy audits, insulation, weather stripping, appliance subsidies, things like that, until the point that the next investment is more expensive than power generation. So as long as it's cheaper than buying the next kilowatt hour of power, you can make those investments. And any state can do that. A number of states have. It's, again, in wonky terms called least cost procurement, but it's basically the idea of buying the cheapest energy resource. So state utility commissions can do that. Legislatures can do that. That's the biggest thing structurally we can do to really create an energy efficiency marketplace that, again, competes competes on cost. We're not talking about any crazy expensive things. We're talking about things that are cheaper than power generation. With the cost of commodities, natural gas going up so much, there's a lot more cheap efficiency out there. So right at the end of the wires, as a consumer, what that means is you have more people showing up on your doorstep saying, you know, do you have a 20-year-old refrigerator in your basement that's still plugged in? 20% of your load could be just that old refrigerator you forgot about a decade ago. If you unplug it, it would probably be cheaper for all of us. We just bought you a small new refrigerator and took that damn thing away. But there's a variety of things we haven't done because we haven't given the utilities really the incentive to focus on saving money.
Okay.
Congressman Hinchey.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, gentlemen, very much for this opportunity to listen to you and to learn a very number of important things. Very grateful to you for being here. The idea of energy efficiency, I think, is very critical. Last year, the Congress finally passed an energy efficiency bill which upgraded the CAFE standards, the automobile fuel efficiency standards, upgraded them to 35 miles a gallon by the year 2020. This was the first time that was done in 32 years. And that standard was good, but it seems to many of us like very little, that a lot more could be done. A number of us have introduced another bill, for example, and did it last year, introduced that bill last year, which would jack up these CAFE standards to at least 40 miles a gallon by the year 2016, which is, I think, very easily achievable. And I would just like to hear your comments on that. What do you think that we could do in terms of CAFE standards, automobile efficiency, miles to a gallon? How much, how quickly do you think that we could accomplish that kind of efficiency?
Congressman Hinchey, I think there's a great deal that can be done, and the great news is that the automobile companies themselves, I think, are much more convinced about that than they have been in the past. Yeah. I mentioned in my testimony that at Google we actually converted several Toyota Priuses and Ford Escapes to be plug-in vehicles, and we tested those in a very with professional drivers, following federal data on how consumers actually drive, and the Ford Escape plug-ins got 50 miles per gallon. The plug-in Priuses got over 90 miles per gallon. So we know how to do this. This is technology that is available. So I think it would be fair to revisit the CAFE law and consider increasing that those requirements. In conjunction with that, I think we do need to also provide some help with some of the infrastructure that our utilities are going to need, for example, if we're going to move to plug-in hybrids, because I think that's a big opportunity. And so I'd encourage you to take a look at that as well.
Thank you. Dr. Kumi?
Congressman, thanks for your question. One of the issues that I think people need to think about when they're examining the car efficiency question is the mass of the vehicle. And we've designed vehicles more or less in the same way for a long time, using materials that have changed somewhat over the last 20 years. But there are a lot of new materials that we now know are more energy absorbing, lighter, and allow vehicles to still be a good size, but much lighter, and therefore more efficient. And so part of the thinking around this, I agree with Dan that we need to re-examine where those CAFE standards should go, but part of that evaluation, I think, should be kind of whole system redesign using current materials, current information technologies, not assuming the way we've always designed cars is the way they need to be designed going forward.
Mr. Mills?
Congressman, I just first want to thank you. Your brother has taught a couple of my sons at school locally, and they're
he's a great math teacher.
He is a great math teacher. The automotive industry is fascinating. They've, as I think everybody knows, they've figured out that they might have to build different kinds of cars to sell in this price climate, and I think the automotive industry believes the price climate's in this range for a while. And I want to answer briefly the question about timing that you had asked. There are today dozens of car models that get between 30 and 40 miles per gallon. So consumers have the ability to buy high efficiency cars today. It's not like automakers haven't figured out how to make them. They do exist. In fact, the demand for used Honda Civics, I've reading recently in the Wall Street Journal, are priced at the same price as new Honda Civics because they're north of 30 miles per gallon on the highway, and you can you could almost have yourself paid to buy a Silverado taken off a lot at some GM dealer. So some of the market response is already taking place, and a couple of witnesses have noted the auto industry has figured this out. In fact, ironically enough, there's some remarkable leadership going on in the R&D labs at the auto industry, in my experience, through the investment work that I do. I wouldn't call it stealth work. They just aren't getting that much credit for it, frankly, for some stunning changes in car architecture, car design, not just hybrids and plug-in hybrids. When I first wrote about plug-in hybrids a few years ago in a Forbes article, the fact checker called all the major automakers, and they all said universally to the fact checker at Forbes that I was wrong, I was nuts, they weren't going to make them, they weren't in the plans. And I think at that time it wasn't so much they had their head in the sand. I happen to know from my own intel, if you like, that they were doing that. They just didn't want to signal where they were in the path in a few cases, particularly in Toyota's case. They're very secretive about these radical changes they're making in car design. But.
Well, Secretary Bowles?
Congressman, I would just say to endorse what the others have said about revisiting CAFE. I certainly think it makes sense for the United States. One other element I just would throw into the mix is we in California, 14 states, have been pursuing a waiver from the EPA for the Cal-LEV standard, which would allow us as states to decide on one other standard that we could pursue more aggressively. And I think that's another step that Congress could step in and override the, in my view, recalcitrance from the EPA in terms of letting states go further when they're ready to, and recognizing it's only one other standard. We're not talking about a myriad of standards. So it's another thing that Congress could do if they didn't want to touch CAFE right now.
Thank you, Congressman Hinchey, and I want to thank all of the witnesses once again. First, to Mr. Riker, I am very interested in the low-income home weatherization program. I'm going to put in some legislation to move it up. Can you talk a little bit more about the program? Why is it so uniquely positioned to help reduce energy consumption as well as U.S. emissions? What can we in Congress do to ensure the remaining 28 million homes eligible for assistance receive the weatherization support they need? There's such bang for the buck, and frankly, as you said, it's a permanent solution, whereas LIHEAP is a year-to-year solution.
Mr. Chairman, it's a great program that has received very little attention.
Why do you think?
We haven't focused on energy efficiency as this year at all.
Yeah.
And when we've gotten into trouble in terms of higher energy prices, the general reaction in Congress has been, let's put more money into the low-income home energy assistance program, LIHEAP, which is an important program. It does buy down people's energy bills, but that's a one-time buy down. And to be candid, it really gets to a very, very small percentage of the need, both in terms of eligible families and how much it actually helps them. The great thing about weatherization as a complement to LIHEAP is that it continues to return savings year after year after year. 20 to 40% improvement in energy bills, not even taking into account what you can do if you also improve some of the electricity using appliances in the home. The great news is there is an established base of home weatherization providers all around the United States, scores of them. They've been at it since the 1970s. They've done roughly 6 million homes. There's a very established process for doing it that starts with a home energy audit, a standardized set of tools you use for that, a standardized set of approaches you take to making the changes in the home. What's exciting now, though, is that there is increasingly the opportunity to not just have this be federally funded, but there may well be ways to aggregate hundreds or thousands of homes into a financeable package. And I mentioned that in my testimony. Right. Imagine being able to not only have federal dollars going into this, but also get the private sector to start investing in these kinds of upgrades. The problem today is we're only weatherizing on the order of 100 or 200,000 homes a year. The Energy Department has actually proposed this year to zero out the weatherization budget, as you know.
That's hard to believe given everything that's happened.
We should be going the opposite direction. 1 million homes a year for the next 10 years. We'd at least get to a third of what we could do. The job creation is extraordinary. The climate change impacts are extraordinary. We'd even moderate the price of natural gas. Right. If you took...
How long does it, if you weatherize a home in year one, how long does it stay weatherized? Forever, or does something deteriorate?
Well, so, I mean, the savings are over many, many years. You know, 20 years.
But would you have to re-weatherize it 20 years from now?
certain things will still be in effect. You know, good insulation can last longer than that. Good windows can last longer than that. Other things, you might have to go back, but normal home maintenance would get you there. But those first 10, 20, 25 years, you really see major savings.
Yep. Mr. Mills, do you disagree with anything Mr. Riker said about weatherization? Not about in general, but in just on weatherization.
Well, no. I mean, weatherization of homes and buildings is important. I think that the only thing that I would be nervous about is a financing structure, just because it's difficult in practical systems. This has been done before in many states to weatherize low-income homes.
Just a quick question let me ask Dr. Kumi, Secretary Bowles. My time's running out and we have a vote, so we're going to have to be quick, so it's hard to give a quick answer. If you could do one thing, if we, Senate, House, President, could do one thing to encourage efficiency right now to help us save money, reduce oil consumption, reduce prices, what would you choose? Secretary Bowles? You've got to answer quick.
I'll give you a two-part. For this winter, which will be very cold, and we need weatherization in LIHEAP very badly because people are going to die from this cold winter, I would do a lot of subsidization of insulation and weather stripping. That's the biggest short-term thing. Long-term, I would give the states irresistible incentives to totally restructure their electricity market as we have done and California has done.
Great. Dr. Kumi.
And I would help the states to adopt decoupling and profit incentives for energy efficiency, because when you make it profitable for companies to pursue efficiency, they go after it.
Yep. No, your ideas are very interesting, and you're harnessing the free market to do some good. And now there are, I don't know if you call them externalities, but imperfections in the free market that don't allow it to happen. If there were perfect knowledge, the little example you gave of the IT buyer not caring about efficiency wouldn't matter. I don't know if it's perfect knowledge. I don't know what you call it. Yeah, it is perfect knowledge of the CEO at the top of the company.
Yeah, and also misplaced incentives.
Right. I want to thank our witnesses. I know this hearing was a little brief because of the votes and unfortunate scheduling, but it was a great hearing, and this is, to me, one of the great frustrations is energy efficiency is the stake. It doesn't get the attention it deserves, and our job here will be to try to move some of these pieces forward. So thank all four of you.
Thank you.
Hearing's adjourned.